Hi. In this video I'm going to read the footnote to paragraph 9 of the introduction of Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach's Versuch, über wahre Art das Clavier zu spielen. And before I do, I just want to say something about figured bass. He's talking in this footnote about figured bass and the stiffness that it can occur from Trommel-basses, and that's Trommel-basses. There, trommel can be translated to drum, and bass is bass, and so you could say call it a drum bass. And in the translation that I provide on the screen, I just call it a Trommel-bass. And that's, like I've said in previous videos, that's when the note, the left hand note is repeated. And he explains what he means by that. So, and what happens in figured bass is that, I've said it before, but I'll just say it again, that what you get is the piano player gets the bass line. And in connection here, it's the bass line to a piece for a larger ensemble, like an orchestra or something. And when playing figured bass, the harpsichordist or the keyboard player adds the harmony to the bass note. And depending on the circumstances, you can add more or less notes, harmony notes, to that bass note. So when you're playing with an orchestra, if you play a single note with the left hand, it might not be loud enough. You might not hear it with all the other instruments. So what is open for the harpsichordist to do is he could play that note as an octave, double that note and play it as an octave on the left hand. That makes the sound bigger. Or you can, in the left hand, play the full chord, the full harmony in the hand, as well as playing the full harmony in the right hand too with it. And that creates an even bigger sound. So that's not indicated. That's free for the harpsichordist or the piano player to decide themselves how many voices they want to add to their accompaniment. And it's dependent on the situation. If you're accompanying an instrument that's quiet, you'd have less voices on the harpsichord or piano or whatever instrument, keyboard instrument it is you're accompanying with, so you don't overpower the solo instrument. And in the case of orchestra, you'll add more voices out of necessity, because the sound from the orchestra will drown out the sound of the harpsichord if you're only playing with 3 or 4 voices. And it's called that, voices, that when let's say you have a G on the left hand, and the harmony is that you add the triad, the G major chord to that. If you play with 3 voices, what you have is, in the left hand you have your bass note, the G, and in the right hand you could have the 2 other notes of the triad, B and D. So, and that would be, with the 2 notes in the right hand and the 1 note in the left hand, that would be 3 voices. And when you play with 4 voices, you'll have 3 notes in the right hand, and you play the bass note with the left hand. So that would be 3 voices. And so then you can if that's not enough sound, you can have 4 voices as well. So you could double one of the notes in the right hand, like I'll double the B. And then that's 5 voices. And you can as well play the octave in the left hand. So you could play it with that. And then for fortissimo, you can play the full chord in the left hand instead of just the bass note. And the full chord in the right hand. You know, so you're heard in context of a whole orchestra playing around you. So when so that's the one thing. The other thing is Bach talks about letting notes pass through, and in figured bass as well. It's common that when you change harmonies, when you go from one harmony to another, it's very often that you're not going to play every note again. Let's say you're going from C to G. Well, the G is common in both chords, and it could be that you don't, when you're playing figured bass, that you don't play the G twice, that you just leave it down. And then play, just change the other notes of the chord. So, and so what you're doing with that G is you're letting it pass through. So when Bach talks about letting notes pass through in figured bass, that's what he means, that you don't play all the notes. You let them, you hold them down and let them pass through without like hitting them a second time for the next chord. And it's it happens very naturally when you're playing figured bass. And so I just wanted to say those 2 things. And now I'll read the footnote. Ich habe für nötig gefunden, denen zu gefallen, welchen das Amt den Generalbass zu spielen aufgetragen ist, meine Gedanken über die Art geschwinde Noten auf einem Tone mit der linken Hand abzufertigen, bei dieser Gelegenheit zu eröffnen. Es ist dieses sonst die sicherste Gelegenheit, wodurch die besten Hände verdorben und steif werden können, indem dergleichen Noten bei unserer jetzigen Setzart sehr gewöhnlich sind. Es können ferner diejenigen durch diese Anmerkung sich rechtfertigen, von welchen ausdrücklich verlangt wird, alle Noten mit der linken Hand auszudrücken. Da das Durchgehen der Noten im Generalbasse überhaupt bekannt genug ist, so versteht es sich von selbst, dass die rechte Hand in diesem Falle ebenfalls nicht alle Noten anschlägt. Die geschwinden Noten auf einem Tone, von deren Schädlichkeit ich spreche, sind die Ochteile im geschwinden Zeitmaße und im gemäßigsten die Sechzehnteile. Ich setze ferner zum Voraus, dass außer dem Klavier noch ein anderes Instrument den Bass mitspielt. Ist das Klavier alleine, so spielt man solche Noten wie die Schwärmer mit abgewechselten Fingern. Es wird zwar auf diese Art durch Hinweglassung der Oktave der Bass nicht allezeit durchdringend genug sein, man muss aber diese kleine Unvollkommenheit anderen größeren Übeln vorziehen. Man tut also am besten, man lässt von solchen Noten nach Beschaffenheit des Zeitmaßes und der Taktart 1, 3 oder 5 ohne Anschlag durchgehen, und die anzuschlagenden spielt man mit der Oktave auch wohl bei Fortissimo mit beiden vollen Händen, mit schwereren Anschlägen etwas unterhalten, damit die Saiten genugsam zittern können und ein Ton sich mit dem anderen wohl vereinige. Man kann allenfalls, um die Mitbegleitenden nicht zu verwirren, den ersten Takt, wie er geschrieben steht, spielen und nachher die Noten durchgehen lassen. Sonst hätte man, wenn ja jede Note auf dem Flügel sollte und müsste gehört werden, noch dieses Mittel übrig, dass man in diesem Falle durch einen mit beiden Händen abwechselnden Anschlag die vorgeschriebene Bewegung hervorbrachte. Doch habe ich aus der Erfahrung, dass diese Art zu begleiten für die Mitspielenden etwas verführerisch ist, weil die rechte Hand beständig zu spät kommt. Und dieses hat mich in meiner Meinung bestärkt, dass das Klavier allezeit das Augenmerk des Taktes sein und bleiben wird. So wenig Unrecht, ja so nützlich die Art von Begleitung in gewissen Fällen ist, wenn bei haltenden Noten, welche alle Stimmen haben, das Klavier die Taktteile durch den Anschlag deutlich hören lässt, so leichte kann man das Nötige und Nützliche sowohl aus dem durchgehen lassen, als das Schädliche und Unmögliche aus dem Ausdrucke aller Noten erweisen. Dieses Letztere ist schädlich. Andere Instrumentisten können diese Art Noten mit der Zunge und dem Gelenke herausbringen. Der Klavierist allein muss mit dem ganzen steifen Arme dieses Zittern hervorbringen, wenn er wegen Verdoppelung der Oktave mit den Fingern nicht abwechseln kann. Hierdurch wird die linke Hand aus doppelter Ursache steif und folglich unvermögend, Passagen rundheraus zu bringen. Erstlich, weil alle Nerven in einer beständigen Steife erhalten werden, zweitens, weil die übrigen Finger nichts zu tun haben. Man versuche es und spiele einen mit Passagen versehenen Bass, nachdem man sich vorher an Trommel-bassen müde gepaukt hat. Man wird merken, dass die linke Hand und der ganze Arm in einer solchen Müdigkeit, Drehung und Steife sich befinden wird, dass man in der Folge unbrauchbar ist. Solcher Gestalt ist dieses Tockieren auch nicht möglich, indem man heutzutage sehr viel solche Bässe zu sehen kriegt, von denen manchmal kaum einer wegen seiner Länge durchzudauern ist. Bei allen Arten von Musik ruhen bisweilen die anderen Musici nur allein. Das Klavier ist meistenteils ohne Ablösung bisweilen 3, 4 und noch mehrere Stunden durch in beständiger Arbeit. Gesetzt, man wäre dieser Arbeit gewachsen, so würde auch der festeste Musikus durch eine ganz natürlich erfolgende Müdigkeit schläfrig und unvermerkt im Takte schleppend werden. Er wird hierdurch aus dem Vermögen und der Lust gesetzt, andere rührende Gedanken richtig vorzutragen, weil er durch die Trommel-Bässe, welche oft ohne besonderen Ausdruck sind und wobei sich nichts denken lässt, müde und verdrüßlich worden ist. Dieses schädliche Tockieren ist ferner wider die Natur der Flügel sowohl als der Pianoforte. Beide Instrumente verlieren hierdurch ihren natürlichen Ton und die Deutlichkeit. Der Tangente von den Flügeln spricht selten geschwinde genug an. Die Franzosen, welche die Natur des Klaviers sehr gut wissen und welchen wohl bekannt ist, dass man auf selbigem etwas Mehreres als ein bloß Geklimper hervorbringen kann, pflegen zu dem Ende noch jetzo in ihren Generalbässen bei solchen Arten von Noten dem Klavieristen besonders anzudeuten, dass er solche nicht alle anschlagen darf. Außerdem kommt man durch langsame, schwere Anschläge dem in vielen Bässen durch Punkte oder Striche über die erste Note einer Figur angedeutenden Ausdrucke zu Hilfe. Es können ein Haufen Fälle vorkommen, wobei ein deutlicher und in beiden Händen gleicher Anschlag nicht nur nützlich, sondern auch höchst notwendig ist. Das Klavier, welchem unsere Vorfahren schon die Anführung anvertrauten, ist solcher Gestalt am besten imstande, nicht allein die übrigen Bässe, sondern auch die ganze Musik in der nötigen Gleichheit vom Takte zu erhalten. Diese Gleichheit kann auch dem besten Musiker, ob er schon übrigens sein Feuer in seiner Gewalt hat, in anderen Fällen durch die Ermüdung schwer werden. Da dieses nun bei einem geschehen kann, so ist diese Vorsicht, wenn viele zusammen musizieren, so viel nötiger, je mehr hierdurch das Taktschlagen, welches heutzutage bloß bei weitläufigen Musiken gebräuchlich ist, vollkommen ersetzt wird. Der Ton des Flügels, welcher ganz recht von den Mitmusizierenden umgeben steht, fällt allen deutlich ins Gehör. Daher weiß ich, dass sogar zerstreute und weitläufige Musiken, bei welchem oft viele freiwillige und mittelmäßige Musici sich befunden haben, bloß durch den Ton des Flügels in Ordnung erhalten worden sind. Steht der erste Violinist folgends, wie es sich gehört, nahe am Flügel, so kann nicht leicht eine Unordnung einreisen. Bei Singearien, worinnen das Zeitmaß sich schleunig verändert oder worinnen alle Stimmen gleich lärmen und die Singestimme allein lange Noten oder Triolen hat, welche wegen der Einteilung einen deutlichen Taktschlag erfordern, haben die Sänger auf diese Art eine große Erleichterung. Dem Basse wird es ohnedem am leichtesten, die Gleichheit des Taktes zu erhalten, je weniger er gemeiniglich mit schweren und bunten Passagen beschäftigt ist, und je öfter dieser Umstand oft Gelegenheit gibt, dass man ein Stück feuriger anfängt als beschließt. Will jemand anfangen zu eilen oder zu schleppen, so kann er durchs Klavier am deutlichsten zurechtgebracht werden, indem die anderen wegen vieler Passagen oder Rückungen mit sich selbst genug beschäftigt sind. Besonders haben die Stimmen, welche Tempo rubato haben, hierdurch den nötigen nachdrücklichen Vorschlag des Takts. Endlich kann auf diese Art, weil man durch das zu viel Geräusche des Flügels an der genauesten Wahrnehmung nicht verhindert wird, sehr leicht das Zeitmaß, wie es oft nötig ist, etwas Weniges geändert werden, und die hinter oder neben dem Flügel sich befindenden Musici haben einen in beiden Händen gleichen, durchdringenden und folglich den merklichsten Schlag des Takts vor Augen. So I just wanted to say something about the format or the structure of that footnote, as I'm not sure how clear it is. He starts off, first of all, he gives his suggestions how to deal with those Trommel-basses, the repeated notes, like playing them with alternating fingers, like a swarm. And what he says is the best method to hit the notes with the octave in the left hand, and depending on the time signature and the tempo, to leave either 1, 3, or 5 out, and with a weighty attack and somewhat sustained, let the strings vibrate. So, and then he offers the suggestion with alternating hands to create the prescribed movement. And then after that, he talks about how the damage playing all the notes does, how harmful it is, and the cons of playing all the notes. And then after he talks about the French, he's talking about the advantages or the pros of his suggestion about hitting, the notes on the beat more or less, and letting the other ones pass through. So go by without playing them or striking them again. And so from then on, he's, talking about the advantages of that over playing all the notes. Like when he talks about doing it the way Bach, he suggests that you can not only keep the basses in unison, or keep them in sync with the beat, but also the entire orchestra, the whole music, and that keeping the whole orchestra conform with the beat. The other way, where you're playing all the notes. Because of fatigue, that'll become difficult. So he's comparing, when he says the pros and cons, he's comparing it with playing all the notes as opposed to his suggestion where you only play the important notes or the main notes and let the others pass through without playing. And that's the same when he talks at the end about too many noises from the harpsichord, how that won't hinder people from being able to most accurately perceive the beat. Whereas when you're playing all the notes, like he says, it goes against the nature of the keyboard, and the tangents don't speak fast enough, so you're getting noise, and given too much noise, the other musicians won't be able to accurately perceive or follow the beat or what it is you're doing, because there's so much noise preventing them from doing it. So that's the basic structure of that footnote, just in case it wasn't clear. And there was something, it's in that footnote you can sort of get an idea of what Bach is like, and how he generally approaches things, because you can see there that he offers his suggestion, and then after he mentions the French, and when he talks about the pros or reasons why you should do it that way, he offers, I think it was something like 7 reasons why it's good to do it, the advantages of doing it like the way he suggested it. So you can see the type of person he is. He gives a lot of consideration to what he's doing. He doesn't do anything just because. It's always weighed up. He always examines it and considers it properly. And you can see that in this footnote that he provides many reasons. And that's something that's very rare, because you'll see that on YouTube or just anywhere. People, they'll be, people of authority, experts, that they'll prescribe some rule or the way you're meant to do something or not do something. And they'll talk at length about the rule itself, but they won't offer any reasons why you shouldn't be doing it. And it's very often, I think it's always the case, that the reasons why are more important than the rule itself, because it's only with the reasons why, when you know why you're doing something, you know if you've successfully carried out what it is you're meant to be doing because of the reasons why. And you're not a slave to the rules when you know the reason why you're doing it. The only aspect you're a slave to is if you achieve the desired result or not. And the reason why hints at the desired result. So from Bach's reasons why, you get a sense of the elements one in that position, playing figured bass with an orchestra, the things one should be looking out for. And as well, what's interesting in that is he talks about how the musicians, the tone of the harpsichord is surrounded by the musicians. And if you think of the lid up, the tone of the harpsichord, it'll be coming out of the lid. And so the musicians were going to surround that lid, open lid of the harpsichord. And that's where they're positioned. And when Bach says about those standing behind or next to the harpsichord, I would say that is from the perspective of the player. So those behind this is behind the harpsichord, and this is my right. So to the right of the harpsichord, they'd be standing too. And if you think of how nowadays when people play Mozart concertos or Beethoven concertos and conduct themselves at the piano, the way the piano is positioned, pointing towards the orchestra. And I've heard that this is the way the pianos or the were positioned back then. And you can see that that's not what Bach is alluding to in what he says, because when the piano is pointing the orchestra, none of the orchestra players can see your hands. Yet Bach says twice in that footnote about the visual element of keeping the beat with the piano player, that they see the both hands pressing the keys, and through that they get the most, apparent indication of the beat, not just aurally but also visually. And so it would mean that they're standing so they can see the hands of the keyboard player. And as well, what's interesting there is you can see that, Bach's convinced that that's the hands of the keyboard player that will is and always will remain the visual indicator of the beat. And that the keyboard player, the harpsichordist, is replacing conductors at that stage, at that time, more completely. So conducting is out and keeping the beat from the keyboard is in. And Bach talks about the advantages of that. How to hear the beat helps those players, especially those who have tempo rubato, as opposed to conducting the beat. Yeah, and so it would seem from that, I would gather that Bach expected that that's the future. And maybe he'd be surprised that conductors took over again and that's it. And maybe he'd ask with conductors, well, what about tempo rubato? What about that in ensemble playing? And yeah, how would you answer Bach if he asked about tempo rubato? What happened to it? You'd probably say that, we don't do tempo rubato anymore, and I don't think anybody would even know how to do it, even if they tried. So, yeah. And Bach might think, well, is that not worse? And how would you answer that? You'd say, yeah, it might be, could be, but it doesn't matter. Yeah, so that was a tricky one to translate And there's some instances there like that when he's talking about the musician standing around the harpsichord, surrounding the tone of the harpsichord, so surrounding basically the open lid. That he could mean to the right of, in that sentence, he could mean to the right of the harpsichord, which would make sense, which that would mean that when you think of normal concertos now, the way the piano is positioned and the lid is open, the lid is facing the audience. Whereas the harpsichord, if it was up front, or the way Bach describes the position of the players surrounding it, it would mean that it's, instead of it'd be turned around. So the lid would be facing the orchestra, the open lid would be facing the orchestra, and that could be how it was positioned. But it's definitely the case that the musicians are surrounding it so they can see, that those beside and behind the piano or harpsichord can see the hands and get an indication of the beat through that, as well as hearing the tone. And there's another bit where he says, he calls it weitläufigen Musiken. And if you're to take the literal translation of weitläufigen, that can mean extensive, expansive, rambling, weitläufig. And I think in the sense, the only way what he says makes sense is if you consider weitläufigen Musiken as professional orchestra. Because it would make sense that the conducting only works with professional orchestras. Yeah, there's words that if you translate them literally, it doesn't make sense what Bach is talking about. So I think the words denades were used in a different sense than nowadays, even though it's the same word, like weitläufige. So I have translated that as professional orchestras, because that is what makes sense in the context of what Bach is saying here. And my goal is that it's what I present is something that's understandable and from which one can get something out of. So that's it, that's the Einleitung done in completion. And the next section is about fingering, and I'll be looking at that. Okay, thanks.